My name is Clay Emerson. I'm an engineer with Princeton Hydro, a water resource engineering firm, and I'm co-presenting today with Kelsey Stanton from Green Valley's Watershed Association, and we're happy to be here today to talk about what is a very exciting project, which is a retrospective survey of stormwater detention basins. Now, this topic is part of a larger project, and we'll see how this works, which I'll hand over to Kelsey in a moment to talk about. She'll talk about the project introduction, the purpose and scope, some of the other efforts that are going on, and then she'll hand it back over to me, and I'll talk specifically about this survey, and I'll give some background where this kind of unique opportunity came from, and spend a fair amount of time talking about what we actually found, and then we'll wrap it up with findings and next steps. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kelsey.
Hi all. I'm going to give a very brief introduction to Valley Creek Watershed. Most of you are very familiar, some of you very, very familiar with the watershed. It's about 23.5 square miles. The Valley Creek runs through the Great Valley to join with the Schuylkill River in Valley Forge National Park. And as most of you know, it is an important historical and cultural resource. In the winter of 1777-78, it supported General Washington's troops as they were encamped at Valley Forge. It's also a very important ecological and recreational resource. The limestone geology that underlays the creek buffers water temperatures from extremes and provides great habitat for wild populations of both brown and native brook trout. For this reason, it is a Class A wild trout fishery as recognized by the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, and it is an exceptional value stream, the state's highest protection. Over the past 40 years, the entire area has seen a marked increase in development. According to our numbers, the watershed is approaching 20% impervious cover. Now, this has created some severe stormwater issues for the entire watershed. Flooding and sedimentation threatens not only the trout habitat, but the cultural and historical resources, particularly in the bottom third of this watershed. A lot of people will know that during a particularly severe storm recently, the Knox covered bridge was lifted off its foundations and shifted a little bit. And flooding also threatens General Washington's headquarters in Valley Forge. So this image right here gives a pretty good idea of the kind of development we're looking at. A lot of that impervious cover comes from the major roadways. That's Route 202 running through the bottom half of the photo. The Turnpike, Route 29, and Route 30 also run through the watershed, and the area is really known for a lot of corporate campuses and the like. Green Valley's Watershed Association has a long history of working in Valley Creek. Starting in the 1970s, we've worked in a number of partnerships to identify and halt various sources of point and non-point source pollution. For example, in 1978, the closure of the Knickerbocker Sanitary Landfill, which was leaching pollutants into the groundwater. All right. In 1993, with our partners Valley Forge Trout Unlimited, we successfully obtained exceptional value protection for the entire stream, since it is a Class A wild trout fishery. And our work is ongoing as part of the Valley Creek Restoration Partnership. This photo right here is from a riparian buffer planting on Open Lands Conservancy Preserve space back in spring of 2012. We are members of the Valley Creek Restoration Partnership, along with other core partners, the League of Women Voters, Open Lands Conservancy, and Valley Forge Trout Unlimited, and Westchester Fish, Game and Wildlife Association. The partners have total implemented over $1 million in grant projects throughout the watershed, and these range from education programs, habitat restoration, such as the riparian buffer plantings, and stormwater best management practices. The partnership has identified stormwater detention basins as a key stormwater management issue in the watershed, and in 2012 applied, and in 2013 was granted a $200,000 Growing Greener grant from the Department of Environmental Protection to carry out basin retrofits in the watershed. Now, first in that was identifying just where those basins are. So GVA staff, working off of historical surveys from Cahill Associates and from Dr. Emerson's study in 2001, that started with 111 basins as of 2001. Using aerial imagery from Google Earth with an overlay of the LiDAR topography contours, identified at least, that number is undoubtedly growing, 255 stormwater detention basins in the watershed. So this image right here is a map of the watershed in ArcGIS. Each one of those tiny little blue triangles is one of the 255 basins. And in ArcGIS, we also delineated each sub-watershed, ranging from those really light-colored first-order or headwater tributaries, all the way down to the dark red third-order streams where the Valley Creek meets up with the Schuylkill. So this image perhaps gives a better idea of just how many basins there are. Each one of these red balloons in Google Earth is one of the 255 basins that we've identified. And it almost perfectly outlines the shape of Valley Creek Watershed. Again, giving an idea of just how much development we're facing. Now, the GIS software that GVA is using allows us to identify, map, and share our information with our partners. And it's really streamlined the process of this basin naturalization project. This image is an aerial photograph with these red 2-foot LiDAR topography contours, and they've enabled, if I don't knock stuff over, GVA staff to really identify those really distinctive man-made depression shapes. And these are those basins right there. All right. As part of this grant project, about 12 basins will receive naturalization either through reduced mowing or through sowing the basin floor with a native mix of meadow-type plantings. 6 of those will receive major structural upgrades that Meliora Environmental Design has already completed the designs for. 3 of those are on corporate campuses and 3 are owned by the townships. And those structural upgrades range from recontouring the basin floors to the implementation of smart drains. And all of this is to better encourage the basins to capture, filter, and infiltrate the stormwater. Now, the Valley Creek Restoration Partnership members are working with the basin owners to implement the basins and also to working together establish a joint maintenance program that will ensure that these basins remain properly maintained and naturalized. The partnership has identified basin naturalization as a fairly cost-effective, very cost-effective stormwater best management practice. And as I said, up to 12 basins will be naturalized. The end goal of this grant is really to streamline the process so that eventually all of the basins in the Valley Creek Watershed and beyond can be naturalized, just to show how good of a technology this is. We're targeting right now the basins located in the first order, the headwater sub-watersheds, and this will just hopefully keep the non-point source pollution from washing further down in Valley Creek. And where are these basins? They're on homeowners associations' open space. They're on the campuses of corporations and institutions. The corporate basin owners may provide a match to a portion of the naturalization costs. The homeowners associations may provide volunteers for basin planting days. And at the end of this grant in 2016, GVA will publish a report documenting the costs and time that it took to do this naturalization process to serve as a resource. So where are we so far? The basin owners for the 6 basins receiving the major structural upgrades, they've all signed their letters of commitment. Construction documents are completed, so we can put these jobs out to bid shortly. As for the balance of the basins receiving just naturalization, the owners of 3 of them have signed letters of commitment, and Valley Creek Restoration Partnership members are in contact with more basin owners. So a big part of this grant was to have Clay revisit the basins that he studied back in 2001 and to monitor their performance. So without further ado, we're going to get to the exciting part of the presentation and have Clay talk about what he found.
So this is, she said 2001, and in the back of my head I said, wow, that really is a long time ago. I don't know what happened since then. But basically, where this comes from, this is the background of the background, if you will. Back in around 2000, Drexel University had a School of Environmental Science, Engineering, and Policy, and they applied for and were rewarded a fairly sizable National Science Foundation grant, which was to document the effects of urban sprawl on the Valley Creek Watershed. That grant proposal was actually inspired by an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer titled "An Acre an Hour," which was the rate at which the suburban sprawl at that time, again this is 2000, was expanding from the city of Philadelphia outward. So it was a multidisciplinary school, multidisciplinary project. It involved ecologists, sociologists, and groundwater, surface water, a lot of good information, and people really came out. A lot of these people are still active in the field, even in the watershed. That's Rob Ryan, who's at Temple University now, Luann Steffi, who actually jumped ship and went over to the Susquehanna River Basin, shame on her. And that's our friend, a brown trout up there. So my portion of that project where I fit in was with the surface water, with the stormwater in particular. I had an engineering background, and stormwater was always something that interested me. So we looked at the watershed. There's, as Kelsey mentioned now, over 255 and counting stormwater basins. We're approaching probably 20% impervious. It was similar to that in 2000, maybe a little less. So the question was, these are what we would call now historic stormwater detention basins that have been designed with some function in mind, and the question is, well, are they working? We design them site by site. Now we have 20-some square miles with over 100 of them. What's the net impact? What are they actually doing? And that question hadn't really been asked in detail before. So that required us to complete a detailed survey of all these detention basins. And by detailed survey, what I mean by that is we had to not just find them, we had to know how big they were, what the outlet structure configurations were, roughly what the drainage area was to each individual basin, right? They all have little watersheds of their own, right? And then run some calculations to describe how they would work in a given storm. So that was done again 2002, 2003, around then. But what that left us with was a snapshot in time of what all these basins look like, right? We went out, we took pictures of all of them. And so that, I always kind of had that in the back of my head. I wonder what's going on with all those basins, how have things changed. So again, the survey, we went out, took pictures, took notes, took dimensions of things. This is back in 2001. And what we found, and again, this is a talk all of its own that I've given before. Some of you have probably heard. But the end result of that study was that all these detention basins, and again, these are the ones that existed prior to 2001, number one, they have really a negligible impact on watershed-wide stormwater flow. In fact, at the mouth of the watershed, at the downstream end, they can actually increase the peak flow, although not significantly, which was a little counterintuitive, and I've had many of arguments with engineers saying that wasn't possible. But I am an engineer. I usually don't admit it in public, but today it's okay. No. And Michelle talked about this earlier. They're often designed for unrealistic intensities, and these specifically were only designed for the larger events, the vast majority of them. I was naive then. What I didn't expect at that time is that maintenance would be such an issue. I was very naive then. But one of the findings was that indeed, there was a maintenance issue. So people know about this. Valley Creek, Act 167 plan, July 2010, around then, identified maintenance as a plan objective, a protection strategy, and a restoration strategy. So, and I should say that both townships, or all townships in this watershed, have changed their ordinances since that time. So there are good efforts ongoing as far as that's concerned. So this project presented a really rare opportunity to go back to all those basins from 2001 and see what's happened. The survey this round is not as detailed as last. We didn't want to go, I mean, there's no need to go and measure these structures or rerun the model. I was pretty sure that portion of the, there would be no new information in that. I was more interested in just literally looking at them, quick visual inspection, look for significant changes, look for maintenance issues, try and get a qualitative statement. And I'm the typical stormwater tourist now. I'm the one that's looking at the basin. I'm driving the long way around the parking lot. I have a feel for what looks like it works better than something else, and it is qualitative, but being around it, you develop kind of a feel for that, I think. And then also providing some documentation. Take representative photographs before and after. I mean, does this thing still look like the artillery armory that it did back in 2001 with the massive outlet structure here in the background? So very glad to be a part of this. Some of the important questions that we sought to answer: has the maintenance condition changed? Were there issues in 2001 that have been resolved? How has the vegetation community changed? Like Mike said, this is a big experiment. I mean, who knows what's going on in these basins? How is the vegetation responding to that? Bless you. Has the overall expected function of the basins changed? And again, that's what I said, just kind of a qualitative statement. And what are the patterns? In general, what's going on? What things are working? What things are not working? So I think the best way to answer a lot of these questions is to just go through some of the basins. And I've put together, obviously we don't have time to go through all of them, but I've put together a grouping of kind of the more representative and interesting ones. Probably the most representative, or close to it, is this. There's 12 years. What's happened? Looks like they started mowing in a different direction. But this basin is being maintained for what it's worth. It's not doing the best job it could from a volume or water quality standpoint. But it hasn't, I mean, the berm is still there. And it still looks like opening day at the ballpark. So a lot of basins were similar to this. And on the other side, kind of the opposite side of the coin there, this is a basin, again, same basin, photo taken from more or less the same perspective. And there is an outlet structure in there, I promise, I found it. And it was naturalized in 2001. I don't know whether to use the term naturalized or forgotten. I'll use naturalized for today. And I don't think it had been mowed in the 12 years. I don't know. But there's not a clear access to this basin in particular. The vegetation community before and after was primarily goldenrod, which I've learned is an allelopathic, did I get that right? Vegetation which basically plays defense and keeps other things out. And maybe the reason that this hasn't turned into kind of an understory, more woody vegetation, I don't really know. I mean, someone could spend a lot of time looking into that, but very interesting and functioning probably better than most basins, both before and now. This isn't really a fair comparison. This basin was still under construction at the time. There were a number of basins that were going in at that time with the amount of development. But you can see that this is one that's come in quite nicely. and is now, really kind of an aesthetic amenity, I think, in the subdivision here that it's in. And you can see they have a fence. The mowed perimeter makes it kind of look intentional, I think. And is this basin in particular is probably doing a pretty good job, much better than the mowed one that we started with. Okay, this is a basin that we actually heard about in the last session, some of you may have, where this was an intentional naturalization, and it has completely taken hold. You wouldn't even know there was a basin there if there wasn't an information sign to tell you about the project. A couple other photos of it. I mean, it has totally taken off. Sure, there are some invasives present. I mean, it's not perfect. We live in the real world, but functionally, this would be night. That would be day, I guess. It's a much better system. Like all basins, this does have a structural component to it. A lot of this infrastructure out there is old and reaching kind of some material lifespan kind of issues. And you can see that this one is probably in some need of attention there at the outlet structure. Again, this is a more structural aspect, but a lot of this corrugated metal piping has problems at joints and seams, construction techniques, material issues. You could argue back and forth, but that became, as you'll see, kind of a recurring theme. This is another naturalization. I don't know, some people in this room might know who was behind this, or if it was, but it's an excellent retrofit where you went from a mowed, manicured lawn look to a nice kind of wet meadow with a lot of native vegetation, some of which I could even identify. So this is another basin that's probably doing a lot better. And this is at a school, so I'm sure, hopefully, it has some sort of an educational component to it as well. So this is an interesting basin. I assume this was intended to be a wet pond, and you can see that in 2001. On the left here, you have all your signatures of a typical wet pond, stormwater basin, black eye, I don't know. You have your shoreline erosion. The slope is steeper than really it ever should be, and so it's eroding just from the wave action. And then this little grouping up here, I'll try this marker, I don't know if it'll work. These are the Canadian geese running for cover from me. So when I revisited in 2013, I hardly recognized it. In fact, you can't even see the water. Again, I don't know whether to give this landowner credit or just say that their landscaper, didn't like being on that steep slope. Either way, the woody vegetation has grown in. The shoreline erosion, you can't find it if it's there. It's probably not there. My shoes were clean when I returned to my car because the geese were no longer present, thankfully. And when I walked up here, I spooked, I guess, a green heron out of the tree. So it's now providing, the habitat aspect and the ecological value is obviously drastically different between these two photos.
Clay, is the pond still there?
The pond is still there. The water surface elevation looked to be the same as it was previously. So if it was intended to be a wet pond, and I don't know if it was, it looked like it, then it still was that. And the storage volume was identical as far as I could tell from 2001. One note that I would make on that is that the outlet structures at this time were easy to find, easy to inspect, easy for me to measure at that time. Now, I've been there before, I could hardly find them. So from a maintenance standpoint, I don't think that's ideal. I think you need to have some kind of access to those structures to know if something is going wrong. Let's see. Oh, it did take it with me. So another basin, which I don't know if this is intentional or not, but you can see that it was completely mowed bottom, and now both the side slopes, a dry pond though, both the side slopes and the bottom had totally grown in. I would say that this vegetation is dominated by invasives from my inspection of it. But again, what's a better condition? Do we want mowed basins that are getting compacted, that are in all likelihood getting fertilized, that aren't doing a whole lot for the temperature of the runoff, especially in this watershed? Or do we want things like this, albeit with invasive vegetation? I don't know. I think we could probably split this room in two or something, but I would favor the more recent photo in that situation. Okay, so that's kind of what you would expect. Basins going from people maintaining them to maybe the landscaper one day forgets to mow, and then the next guy forgets to mow. Surprisingly, there were a few that went the other way, where you had a basin that this is it. You can't see anything there. It's mostly, I guess, Phragmites, and there were some trees, some pretty large trees in the basin in 2001. And 2013, poof, out of nowhere shows up this perfectly manicured basin. So that was kind of surprising. What happened there? I have no idea. Maybe it was a change in ownership. Someone had different ideas. Maybe something happened here and someone got on their case, and that's what happened. I really don't know. I think, as I'll mention later, I think each one of these basins has its own story, explanation for what happened and why that we may never know. But initially shocking to see something go this way. Again, this is another one that did the same thing. This is a fairly large, shallow basin. You can see it's obviously in the valley there. It was a beautiful wet meadow that, in my guess, probably was mowed maybe once or twice a year. Maybe just once a year. I don't really know, but you can see it was a good, a lot of wet tolerant sedges probably throughout the basin bottom, nice flat bottom. And then more recently, it looks like they're mowing it on a frequent basis. Who knows? Who knows why? Obviously, you wish that they weren't. This looks like a great system over here, probably one of the better ones in that survey. And you can see that now it's just maintained lawn. So again, maybe the property ownership changed. Maybe the property owner's brother owns a landscaping company. That insisted on it being mowed. I don't know, but pretty stark difference. And this is a basin, for example, that I would say, from a water quality standpoint, is probably not functioning as well as it was before. Okay, as far as more, vegetation community specific. Questions go, or observations. Here's a basin in a pretty commercial section of the watershed, I guess is the best way to describe it, where in 2001 the basin was completely dominated by cattails. And shockingly, in 2013, you won't find a cattail in there, at least not at that time of year when the Phragmites is 4 feet overhead. So total shift, one monoculture to another, but dramatic. I mean, there was, as far as I can tell, very little, if any, Phragmites in this at this time, and then it was totally dominated by Phragmites, and the cattail was completely gone. Functionally, I'm not one to say which one of these is necessarily working any better than the other. They're probably both working better than if it were a mowed system. Why did this happen? Number of hypotheses. The outlet structure could have been compromised. Maybe it shifted from a more wet system, which the cattail might dominate, to a slightly drier or more fluctuating system, wet-dry, which the Phragmites might prefer. This winter, with all the salt that went down, maybe we had a couple winters where the salt content, even into the growing season, started working against the cattails. I can't think of anything more tolerant than the Phragmites for the salt. And again, this is getting a large drainage area of parking that I'm sure has tons and tons of salt put down on it. But a total shift. Many of the basins, a good percentage I would say, went from, you see in 2001, you see it's still getting a lot of sun. You have your Phragmites in the bottom, completely taking up the bottom. But there are these are willow trees in the background here. And then what's happened over the past 10 or 12 years is those trees have grown up. They've started to shade out the Phragmites. You now just have little bits of Phragmites around the perimeter, but the basin bottom is completely shaded. I think there's probably two schools of thought on which is working better. I think they're both better than a mowed grass bottom, but definitely a stark difference between the two conditions.
Is the basin the mowed part?
Actually, yeah, these photos are kind of off. So this is the basin in the left photo. On the right, this is the basin where the trees are. This mowed portion is actually the left berm in this photo. So this right photo is kind of panned to the left a little bit. I had the photo looking kind of straight at this, but it was just a tree. Here you can kind of see. They still mow right up to the edge. It may be creeping out, but and then a more kind of drastic example of that, here's a basin kind of in the middle of the watershed, where in 2001 you had kind of a meadow system, but obviously there was some woody vegetation that was showing up. And now it's just, there's probably a lot of deer browsing and stuff going on here too, but there's no understory. It was a little late, and it's not that dark under there, but completely shaded out. Now, one disadvantage of that, for sure, is that, and it's relevant to this structure. In fact, you can barely see the outlet structure, but again, with that a joint in the outlet piping, there's a small kind of sinkhole, if you will. I shouldn't use that word in this watershed, but a small, place where soil has eroded into the pipe, not into the natural geology. And I don't know that the landowner is going to become aware of that anytime soon. And there was also somewhat of an inlet structure failure on this basin that caused a lot of soil and sediment to wash into the basin. It's kind of coated the leaf litter here. You can kind of see a little bit of color on that. That's another issue that probably isn't going to get addressed. I mean, it probably wouldn't get addressed either way, possibly, but definitely a stark difference in the vegetation community. So, what I find interesting about stormwater detention basins, and especially as you try and apply it to more green methods with native vegetation planting, is the way that these outlet structures are designed, and the way that the basin grading is designed in relation to that outlet structure has everything to do with what grows where. And so if you change that over the course of time, everything has to restart. And how could you change that over time? You could be a milk jug that washes down and clogs the low flow orifice in this thing. That's all it takes. In a growing season with a milk jug there, and everything you planted decided that it's high water and I'm running for the hills. I don't know that that's what's going on here. There is a low flow orifice without a trash rack, so this, you can see in 2001 it was kind of like a moonscape with a desiccated, but you can also see that there's high water marks clear on the outlet structure in this retaining wall. Surprisingly, in 2013, nothing's really stepped up in here, no Phragmites even. And it's probably because, my theory on this is twofold. There's a low flow orifice that has a tendency to get clogged, so it hasn't really set up any kind of balance as far as the hydrology of this basin is concerned. Maybe it's dry some years, maybe it's wet others. Also, there's more than likely a soil issue here. You can tell how deep this basin is. Even without the construction traffic, this soil probably had a really high bulk density, being probably close to bedrock. So this one may have never really worked to begin with, but surprisingly, nothing has taken hold there. So it suggests those changes or an underlying, no pun intended, soil issue.
I would suggest too that probably one on the left has a clay liner.
It looks like it. I think that might be, the way it's desiccated like that, it looks like it. I think this might be, it's either a clay liner or it could be, had never been cleaned out after construction. You know, just the silt and clay from, that eroded during construction, adding to an already poor soil.
Okay, and since I interrupted you, I'll continue on.
That's
with
fine.
another statement. You're missing a really, really critical element in all these basins.
Go ahead.
Litter, trash. Did you go and clean these up before every photograph or what?
No, I did not.
Where's the trash? Where is the
I don't know. We
plastic
got
bottle?
to get out there and throw it. I guess it really wasn't that bad, to be quite honest with you. Which is a good point. It's a really good point, because maybe that's something that these property owners are doing. Maybe it's just the location of these basins, the communities that they're in. You know, it's a whole other aspect to it, but it's a good point.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Besides the one milk jug back in 2001.
It's good to see.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a pretty nice part of the world.
That's true. This is
I mean, those the corporate ones, we take care of ourselves pretty nicely, don't we?
yes.
No,
Yeah.
No?
no.
Well, as far
I know, I'm so There's not even one plastic bag there.
Is this
I-
all limestone?
no, not the whole thing.
Some of it.
Some of these are in limestone
So
or in
how
the
many of these
Elbrook.
do have liners?
I mean, I know for sure on numerous ones I've seen plastic liners exposed, you know, rips and tears.
Definitely have these right.
Well, down where the limestone runs through, yeah. I might have a photo of one of those in here. Like this one, for example, is kind of up on the slope. I don't think this is in limestone. This is an odd detention basin because it's kind of an in-stream basin. It has base flow throughout the growing season. In 2001, I promise, I saw a brown trout in this basin. Yeah, I don't know. He was obviously, yeah, I don't know. I mean, he was doing his thing, but you know, a little guy, but definitely a trout. And this is coming right out of some. I mean, I don't know what the drainage area is to this basin offhand. But there's probably a lot of springs coming off this slope. So there's probably a lot of people with, you know, wet spots that have under drains that are piped through who knows what kind of a system into this. So it's probably getting some pretty high quality base flow as far as temperature and things like that go, which might have explained it. You'd be surprised how far up in this watershed you can find any fish. Just keep going up. If there's water, you probably find a fish. And probably a lot of that has to do with the geology. But this basin from 2001 to 2013, very similar. It's a graded some. I don't know if this piece of plywood was an intentional thing there that kind of blocked that up. It's come up, and you can see that sediment as it's continuing to go through this narrow stream, and with this turf grass vegetation, it's just depositing the sediment right along the edge of that entrenched channel, and it's kind of grown up. So if you looked at this in profile, this stream channel, it actually kind of looks like that. It's kind of disconnected from the basin itself for those small storms, because the sediment just gets deposited right, the heavy sediment right alongside the stream channel as it goes. And then just one other photo of that. There was some pretty bad erosion at the inlet structure before. It's still going on. It looks like it's kind of grown in, but it's kind of worked its way around this retaining wall. I mean, it hasn't really gotten a whole lot better. This is a pretty nasty shot of it here, but okay, so what's different between these two pictures? It's the same structure, same basin. Well, it's not the same basin anymore, but so this is another sort of in-stream basin. It has a little bit of base flow at the times that I've been there. I don't know what this was intended. I haven't seen the design plans for this, but I can tell you for sure that there's, 2.5 feet of not sediment, really just bed load that's washed into this. So the storage in this basin is definitely not what it was, nor is the flow control, because maybe this was intended to have 2 orifices at this elevation, and now it has a much bigger one that's on its way to getting clogged, actually. So, yeah, I mean, a lot can be said about this. A lot of the sediment probably has showed up in within hours during very extreme high intensity events. This probably isn't a dribs and drabs kind of thing. This is an extreme event driven system. Ironically, probably it's related to the failure of a detention basin that's upstream from this one. But you can see that they're definitely two different systems. Not as dramatic, but similar. A smaller basin, smaller drainage area, but the storage, there's a low flow orifice here. I know it's kind of dark right down here, which is now pretty much buried. I don't know, maybe this was just leaf disposal over years, and it's kind of built up organic matter, probably anaerobic, and it's just kind of piling up. So the storage isn't there. Don't know exactly what was going on here. It was fairly new, gabion structures. Someone got a good deal on some stone. Maybe this was an infiltration system that failed and is now quite an attractive wetland with a lot of bulrush in there. Might not have the storage capacity it was intended to be designed for, but from a habitat standpoint, from a water quality standpoint, I mean, I don't think I even need to talk about it. Another kind of clogged, we had a lot of dry basins did convert to wet basins. The outlet structures way back here, you can see they had some clogging problems before because the marks on the outlet structure. So this was a basin who that storage volume, as far as a peak flow rate control function, this basin is no more almost. It's just full of water. So anything water that comes in, the equal volume is going to go out. It just hasn't been maintained. Another wet pond or dry pond turned wet, somewhat naturalized. I think this is unintentional. I think this is a clogged standpipe as well.
Is that the East Whiteland Township building?
I'm not sure. It might be. It is, actually. Another, again, there must be a story here that I don't know, but wet pond in 2001. Maybe it was temporary for construction that was still ongoing. Dry pond now. They still got the no ice skating signs up. I don't think they have to worry about that. But very, very different. And this is, probably 4 feet of water in this photo. That's been repaired since August. But here you have pretty interesting construction, brick and mortar, older section, one of the older basins probably in the watershed, and you see the corrugated metal, which is routinely a combination that doesn't end well. Some more of those, anything concrete to metal, you start seeing outlet structure here. You can see all this soil that's washed into this, and they better get on that because that's going to get, well, it's not going to get any better. We'll leave it like that. Again, corrugated metal, the concrete, I don't know the intention, I mean, this is just probably an engineering issue, turn material issue, just doesn't seem to work too well. And here's an outlet structure which was bad then in 2001, kind of rusted out, had eroded. And as it turns out, this thing hasn't gotten any better. It hasn't fixed itself. In 12 years, it's collapsed over. They must have fired the landscaper here. They gave up on that, and they kind of gave up on the whole basin here. But this is a site that's probably changed ownership. I don't know. It could have changed owners 3 or 4 times in 12 years. So, you know, how are these things getting handed over on all these kind of legacy systems? Kind of the final example here, a basin that was typical, mowed, side slopes, and then the low end was kind of overgrown back in 2001. And in 2001, the outlet structure, the berm had entirely failed. There was no berm left. So this is the anti-seepage collar around the outlet pipe that you're not supposed to see. It's supposed to be under the soil. This is like a dam failure, a dam breach. The joke that I had said before was you could count the number of Christmas trees to figure out how many years ago that had happened by how many they had deposited here. Unfortunately, it hasn't gotten, you know, this also hasn't fixed itself, and no one else has fixed it. And certainly this is a sediment source. Immediately downstream of this is a large gully that's eroded out. I mean, this is a basin that would right now be better having never been built, because all this thing does is concentrate flow to one point, which is the worst thing you could do. I mean, that's what all these basins do, essentially, is concentrate flow. But this one in particular is pretty bad. And then finally, this is downstream of one. A head cut that was above my head in 2001 has progressed all the way upstream, right up against the flared end section, which is now could eventually get undermined, and then sections of pipe will fall off, and then eventually the whole thing will give way. So to sum this up, the big thing, vegetation changes, patterns. In 2001, roughly 80% were mowed, with about 20% being naturalized, neglected, whatever, you know, whether it's intentional or not, you know. In 2013, that's shifted by about 10% right now as far as the numbers go, which is great, you know. Obviously, another 12, but kind of moving this way I think is a good thing. There are some issues with just material lifespan, life expectancy. That connection between different materials was routinely problematic. And again, all these basins kind of have their own story for reasons why they're doing what they're doing. And undoubtedly, the ownership changing probably has a lot to do with that. So, qualitatively, and it just so happened that this worked out evenly, but about 20% are probably not working as well, and about 20% are probably working better. The majority probably doing about the same thing they were. That's just the way it worked out, kind of interestingly, exactly even. So some considerations. More recently, there's been a trend towards underground systems. Why? Because you can park on it, unfortunately. From a temperature standpoint, the underground systems are great. It's like a stormwater geothermal system. But if we're not inspecting and maintaining our surface features, I don't have a whole lot of confidence that we're going to do any better with the underground system. And I have nothing really good to say about underground systems in general. But there is a shift towards that. And again, a lot of these basins are the older basins, you know, pre-2000, and regulations in both these municipalities have changed. So, signs of progress. That slide that I showed you with the construction site, the acre per hour slide. This is the stormwater basin at that subdivision now. It just looks like a forest, but there's a basin in there. And this is the other one that I did show you before. And what I like about this outlet structure, they painted it green, got the idea, but they also just mow just once around it so they can see what's going on, and hopefully they'll come out to clean this stuff off soon enough. And what we want to see, and this is this project we did not in Valley Creek, close by though, where we took standard detention basin and really converted it into, it was in someone's backyard, and really converted it into more of just a functional meadow that happens to have a concrete structure that you can is no longer the focus of your attention. And obviously the landowner is very satisfied with this conversion. So this is what we want to see throughout the watershed. So with that, I think we may have about 5 minutes or 10 minutes for questions. I don't want to stand in between you and your lunch. But Kelsey and I would be happy to entertain any questions. Yes, Wes.
On the earlier work, when this was tried before, that's 20 years ago, give or take, attempts to get anybody to work with retrofitting were met with great negativity. What incentives, how are you getting these guys to, since they don't have any permitting requirements on their existing facilities, how do you convince them to do structural changes to their existing facility, as pathetic as it might be, since it might just cause them trouble?
That's a good question, and fortunately for Valley Creek, they have a bunch of people, Chuck at Valley Creek Partnership, who are on the ground educating, and I think that it's a slow process, but just like everything, I kind of describe it as it's a big barge. It's not going anywhere quickly. It starts with education, but with slow, constant pressure and on the ground work, I think it's a mindset that needs to change really. I mean, Wes, but and I think it is changing. Not probably as quick as anyone in this room would like or would expect, but I think it's a slow roller, basically.
Are you intending to translate this into MS4 TMDL credits?
I think that I don't speak for both for all the townships in here, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, why wouldn't you? Absolutely.
We just completed a plan for the Neshaminy Creek watershed that's based on its TMDL for TSS. And one of the major key components is retrofitting basins, because similar to this watershed, Neshaminy has hundreds of basins and like you say, Clay, the low-hanging fruit is these basins. If you can retrofit them and increase your TSS removal rate, that's a credit for TMDL for both municipalities and for the watershed in general.
Yeah, so that's a good point, Wes. I think that really kicks in. Yes, Owen.
Clay, from all that you've learned, what would you think would give the best shot at cheap and dirty work with all of these almost 300 basins on Valley that really would get transpiration, infiltration, and the whole process going again, and turns out to be kind of beautiful too, green?
Yeah, I think that the basin retrofits are the quickest and easiest approach. I mean, there are these structures, call them whatever you want, legacy structures that take all your runoff from all your paved surfaces and put it in one place. So no better a place to do something with it than in the basin. And as this project plays out, we can see, and we've seen before, how relatively inexpensive these kind of naturalizations can be. So I think that this is really the quickest and easiest and cheapest way to get the most done. Yes?
The trend to go underground, is that the same area? Is it just like a basin underground? Or is it different things we're doing underground?
Usually it's large diameter pipes, a whole row of them, encased in a stone bed. And it's popular, unfortunately, for a commercial development, obviously, because every parking spot is a premium. And if they can, you can't park in the meadows that I showed. And so a lot of systems tend to go that way. And as soon as you put that water underground, all of your biological processes that keep the soil working, keep the soil alive, keep the stormwater basin hopefully working, are gone. You know, there's no freeze thaw, there's no biological activity, there's no roots, there's no plants, no transpiration. There's not a whole lot good going on as far as that, besides the temperature. So it's a trend. It's understandable, but I think it's unfortunate too.
Park the same area, it's not like less area, it's the same area.
It's the same area except you can park on it, so it's basically doesn't take up any area. So
On the scale of Schuylkill River, how important do you think this unmaintained basin issue is?
I don't think that it's unique to Valley Creek, not for a minute. In fact, I think Valley Creek's probably much better off than a lot of watersheds. There's a lot more awareness in this watershed. There's a lot more voices in this watershed. So I don't think, I think this is probably a better example as far as maintenance is concerned in the Schuylkill in total.
Yeah, just from some of the survey work we did in the Neshaminy, again, this is just general observations.
Mhm.
It looks like Valley Creek is a little ahead of
Mhm.
than what Neshaminy is.
Yes.
That's kind of a related question. Do you have any pushback from private owners about going in and, photographing their basins? Back then and
A little bit. I think I got a parking ticket at Penn State, Great Valley, as it were. I'm not a graduate of Penn State, so I guess they knew that.
well, yeah, just curious about the outreach,
yeah.
how you approach people. What was
Yeah.
they worried you were gonna
No, I mean,
tell them they were
basically the idea with this is I don't know where any of these basins are, okay? And I don't know what township they're in or who owns them. But I thought it's a valuable opportunity to at least give a snapshot of what's going on in the watershed. So, but most people who, they want to know what's going on, and a little bit of kickback. Yes.
In the early work with Basin Retrofits, we were only able to get cooperation from the townships that own their own basins.
Right.
And now, with this, under this grant, there is a major corporation in the
Yeah.
area that's allowing 3 of its basins to be retrofit, and we're really looking to that as a step forward of working with the corporate community.
Yeah,
And
as
there's
an example.
HOA that homeowners association that's going to offer it has 3 or 4 basins.
Yeah, and those were some of the ones we mentioned. So that's hopefully that's just the beginning, and especially with the corporate, I don't know, sponsor, if you will, or host. There's a lot of corporate space in this watershed, as you know. A lot of it's empty right now, surprisingly, but hopefully that's just the first step. Yes?
Back a little while ago, the idea of retrofitting was largely naturalization and naturalization of the vegetation. Now I'm seeing more expensive issues where the volume holding capacity is lowered because of the sedimentation accumulation, the need for completely redoing the outflow structures. Are there any programs around that can encourage homeowners, property owners associations, whatever it be, to do the right thing and do the big job?
The big, more structural component, you mean?
How are you going to restore the volume capacity of you're going to have to dredge.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to spend a lot of money for structural stuff to redo whatever the outflow structures are. That's expensive.
Yeah, I mean, there are grant opportunities, there's educational to try and reach out to those people. My experience is if you have a basin that's working the way it's supposed to, if you don't have any major kind of failure, the sediment accumulation is not, the basins that have filled in that I've noticed in this survey are either they're full of water because the outlet structure is clogged, that's an easy fix, or it's, like that one, it's in a steep drainage area, it has a trip that kind of flows through it, and you have bed load that, again, probably showed up in 1 or 2 storms, which is a major issue. And then the other one where it just looks like someone was dumping their leaves for the past, there's been a few of those, someone just dumping organic matter in. So a properly maintained basin that hasn't been dumped in or hasn't had some catastrophic issue The storage volume probably is just noise in terms of the calculations of storage volume of the basin. I haven't seen, at least in this watershed, besides those kind of catastrophic few and the dumping grounds, so to speak, I really haven't seen that to be too big an issue.